First of all, let me say, we clarify this because apparently it's been said that I declined into alcoholism immediately after that and I lost interest in football. I mean, the following year I was a league top scorer and we won the FA Cup at Wembley.
When Jimmy Greaves passed away in 2021, England lost its greatest ever goalscorer, but his story is haunted by the men he felt betrayed by. Some, he might say, he never respected. By the numbers, he was a phenomenon. He remains the highest goalscorer in the history of English top-flight football with 357 goals. For his country, he scored 44 goals in just 57 England games. His record of 6 international hat-tricks has yet to be surpassed by any England player. Yet, his legacy isn't defined by these goals. It's defined by the one great triumph he was excluded from. The 1966 World Cup final was the zenith of English football and the nadir of his professional life. This 1966 conflict wasn't his only battle. His entire career was a clash between his relaxed, natural genius and the rigid, strict managers who controlled him. The video's title asks for his toughest opponents. They weren't defenders. They were 4 powerful figures who shaped his destiny. Let's start at the beginning. Greaves exploded onto the scene at Chelsea. Born in Manor Park, Essex, his talent was evident from his youth, where he scored over 170 goals in 2 seasons for the Chelsea youth side. He made his Football League debut in August 1957. At just 17 years old, he scored Chelsea's only goal in a draw against Tottenham. This was the beginning of something special. He would score 132 goals in 169 total appearances for the club. His style was characterised as natural and instinctive, a stark contrast to the methodical, often laborious play of the era. He possessed a unique ability to find the net from any angle, often appearing to simply pass the ball into the goal with a calm that belied the pressure of the moment. In November 1959, he became the youngest player in English history to score 100 league goals. He was just 20 years and 290 days old. His 1960-61 season remains the benchmark for Chelsea strikers. He scored 41 top-flight goals, a club record that has never been broken. Greaves was a natural, an artist, but the systems in football wanted a soldier. It's a clash we still see today. Before we get into his first great battle, who do you think is the most natural player in football right now? Let us know in the comments. And if you love stories about football's biggest icons, make sure to subscribe. Despite his personal success at Chelsea, the team failed to challenge for major honours. With the club in need of funds, the decision was made to sell their prized asset. His departure for AC Milan in 1961 for a fee of 80,000 halals was driven by the financial realities of both the club and the player, who sought to escape the restrictive maximum wage that still shackled English football. His first major conflict came in 1961. Greaves's brief spell at AC Milan served as a dress rehearsal for the defining conflict of his professional life. The move to Italy was cursed from the start. He'd been signed by manager Giuseppe Viani, a man he described as a lovely fella. But before Greaves could even arrive in Italy, Viani suffered a heart attack and was replaced by Nereo Rocco. This twist of fate placed Greaves under a manager whose footballing ideology was the complete opposite of his own. Rocco was known as El Paron, the master. He was a towering figure in Italian football, celebrated for introducing the highly defensive Catenaccio system. This was the door-bolt system, a tactical approach that prioritised defensive organisation and collective discipline over individual expression. He was a tactician who prioritised structure and control above all else. For the free-spirited Greaves, Rocco's methods were a profound culture shock. He described the manager as a tyrant. There was a prevailing sentiment that Rocco was anti-English, and Greaves added, "I don't know about that, but he was certainly anti-me." The environment at Milan was one of intense discipline. Greaves referred to it as a boot camp mentality. Players were required to spend half the week locked away in hotels or training compounds, a practice alien to the more relaxed English football culture of the time. This controlling approach was designed to forge a unit, but for an individualist like Greaves, it felt like a prison. The friction between the two men reached its peak in one memorable incident. Rocco, seeking to enforce his strict curfew, locked Greaves into his hotel room. Unwilling to be contained, Greaves escaped out of a window, across a ledge, through a hallway window, and out to freedom via the main reception. This wasn't just youthful rebellion. It was a symbolic rejection of Rocco's absolute authority and a physical manifestation of the clash between the manager's demand for control and the player's yearning for personal freedom. Despite the profound personal misery and his homesickness, Greaves's on-field prowess remained undiminished. He scored 9 goals in just 10 league appearances. This crucial fact proves his failure in Italy was a matter of personality and philosophy, not a decline in his footballing ability. The decision to part ways after only a few months was mutual. Rocco was eager to remove a player who was both unhappy and insubordinate, quickly selling him to Tottenham to fund the purchase of a more system-compliant Brazilian midfielder, Dino Sani. The Italian crucible had been short but deeply formative. It was his first encounter with a manager who demanded the individual submit entirely to the system. This experience made him less willing to adapt to similar demands 5 years later, almost inevitable. After escaping Italy, Greaves returned to London in December 1961. Tottenham Hotspur manager Bill Nicholson signed him for £99,999, a figure deliberately set to spare him the pressure of being English football's first $100,000 player. At White Hart Lane, he found his spiritual home. He scored a hat-trick on his debut against Blackpool. Over 9 years, he became the club's all-time record goal scorer with 266 goals in 379 appearances. At Tottenham, his individual brilliance was paired with collective success. He was a pivotal figure in a team that won 2 FA Cups in 1962 and 1967, and the 1963 European Cup Winners' Cup. In the FA Cup final of 1962, he scored the opening goal in a 3-1 victory over Burnley. The following year, he scored twice in the European final as Spurs defeated Atletico Madrid 5-1, becoming the first British club to win a major European trophy. His status among his peers was undisputed. Teammate Cliff Jones described him simply as the greatest goal scorer there ever was and ever will be. Goalkeeper Pat Jennings called him a genius, praising his composure. Jim just passed the ball into the net, never lashed it. Manager Bill Nicholson recalled the moment he knew he had to sign him. "I wanted to sign him from the moment I saw him score his first goal in league football on his Chelsea debut at White Hart Lane. It had all the hallmarks of his game, improvisation and genius. But his greatest challenge was yet to come. The relationship between England manager Sir Alf Ramsey and Jimmy Greaves was one of professional necessity rather than natural affinity. Ramsey was a quiet revolutionary. He had wrested sole control over team selection from the traditional Football Association committee, a power he intended to use decisively. He was a fastidious planner and a strict disciplinarian whose entire managerial philosophy was built around the supremacy of the team system. His tactical innovation, a narrow 4-4-2 formation that abandoned traditional wingers, led to his team being dubbed the Wingless Wonders. Ramsey's core belief was explicit and unwavering. He did not necessarily select the best individual players, but rather the best players for his system. Greaves was the antithesis of this philosophy. He was pure, improvisational talent. One observer described him as art without permission, a perfect description of his role as a philosophical outlier within Ramsey's rigidly structured machine. While Ramsey was building a disciplined, functional unit, Greaves remained its most brilliant, yet least controllable, component. Greaves began the 1966 World Cup as England's undisputed first-choice striker. He played in all 3 group stage matches. However, in the final group game against France, his tournament was irrevocably changed by a single moment. A robust challenge from French midfielder Joseph Bonnell left Greaves with a deep gash on his shin that required 14 stitches to close. The injury was severe. Greaves later recalled the moment in the dressing room. "I looked down and we were wearing white socks and the boot was full of blood. I knew I wasn't going to be fit really after that." This moment of physical pain opened the door for his replacement and set in motion the chain of events that would lead to his ultimate heartbreak. Ramsey turned to West Ham United's Geoff Hurst, a strong and versatile forward. Until that point, Hurst had been on the bench. He was thrust into the notoriously brutal quarter-final against Argentina, a match of extreme physicality. He seized his opportunity, scoring the game's only goal with a well-taken header. In the semi-final against Portugal, Hurst again played a crucial role, providing an assist in the 2-1 victory that secured England's place in the final. Hurst wasn't just scoring, he was performing the exact role Ramsey's system required. He held the ball, created space, and provided a physical presence that complemented the team's industrious midfield. By the time of the final against West Germany, Greaves had recovered from his injury and was declared fit to play. The nation expected its greatest goalscorer to be reinstated for the biggest match in its history. Ramsey, however, made the monumental and ruthless decision to stick with Hurst. This wasn't merely a case of never change a winning team, it was a deliberate assertion of his managerial philosophy. Hurst's performances had provided Ramsey with the perfect justification to select a player who was arguably a better fit for his system. Hurst was disciplined and followed instructions. Greaves was individualistic flair, a quality that Ramsey viewed as a luxury he could not afford in a World Cup final. By dropping England's most famous striker, Ramsey sent an unequivocal message. His tactical vision was absolute. The system was superior to the individual, no matter how brilliant that individual might be. From Greaves's perspective, this was the ultimate professional betrayal, a decision that led to years of deep private hurt. The immediate emotional fallout for Greaves was devastating. As England celebrated their historic 4-2 victory, fueled by a legendary hat-trick from Geoff Hurst, Greaves felt a profound sense of isolation. He later described the experience with poignant clarity. The overwhelming feeling was being probably the loneliest man in Wembley Stadium that particular day. While his teammates were swept up in a wave of national euphoria, Greaves felt his personal dream had vanished. Unable to partake in the celebrations, he quietly slipped away from the team's hotel that night and went home alone, a moment that crystallized his separation from the triumph. Geoff Hurst, the man who replaced him, later acknowledged the depth of Greaves's pain, stating simply, "You couldn't blame him for his withdrawal." In the wake of the final, Greaves felt a profound sense of emotional abandonment. This was what has been described as a silent legacy, a feeling that his personal anguish was overlooked by teammates absorbed in the glory of their collective achievement. He reportedly never truly forgave the indifference he perceived from some within the squad, including prominent figures like Bobby Charlton, Martin Peters, and Roger Hunt, holding reunions for decades to come. Greaves remained an outsider to that specific experience. He had admitted, "He couldn't force myself to join the festivities on the night of the final," a psychological separation that became permanent. Geoff Hurst later stated that he and Greaves never discussed what happened regarding the events of 1966. The silence was likely not a product of malice, but a natural consequence of profoundly divergent experiences. The victors were immersed in a national euphoria, a state of mind fundamentally incapable of fully processing the unique and solitary grief of the man they had replaced. Greaves's exclusion was physically manifested by the institutional policy of the time. In 1966, FIFA rules stipulated that only the 11 players on the pitch at the final whistle were awarded a winner's medal. This meant that Greaves, along with the rest of the non-playing squad members and even manager Sir Alf Ramsey, received no tangible recognition of their part in the victory. For over 40 years, this policy stood as a concrete symbol of his status as an outsider to England's greatest moment. It wasn't until 2007, following a long campaign led by former UK Sports Minister Richard Cabourn, that FIFA agreed to retroactively award medals to all non-playing members of World Cup winning squads from 1930 to 1974. On June 10, 2009, in a ceremony at Downing Street, Greaves finally received his winner's medal. The moment provided a sense of long overdue, albeit bittersweet, closure. Greaves himself noted the poignancy of the occasion, remarking, "Sir Alf would have been proud because he would also have got a medal. Had he lived, we might have got them a bit sooner." The most challenging period of Greaves's life began in the 1970s. After a final stint at West Ham, he retired from top-flight football in 1971 at the age of just 31. Without the daily structure and purpose of the game, he descended into a severe battle with alcoholism. In his autobiography, Greavesy, he was careful to state that his addiction was not a direct, simplistic result of the 1966 disappointment. However, the narrative of his life inextricably links the two events. His book frames the bitter disappointment of 1966 as one of the key darker aspects of his life that preceded his addiction. The unresolved professional trauma combined with the loss of his footballing identity created a profound void. Alcoholism became the destructive force that filled it. But here's where the story transforms. Greaves did not let this destroy him. After battling the demons of alcoholism that followed his premature retirement, Greaves forged an extraordinary second act. His emergence as a television personality was a revelation. He became the co-host of the iconic Saturday morning show, Saint and Greavesy. This new career allowed him to showcase the natural wit, everyman charm, and disarming humour that had often been suppressed within the rigid confines of professional football. He connected with the public on a human level, discussing the game with an accessibility and warmth that was a world away from the guarded and tactical analysis that was becoming prevalent. This career rebirth propelled him back into the nation's affections. He arguably became more beloved as a personality than he ever was as a player. It cemented his status not as a member of the 66 establishment, but as the people's champion, a flawed, brilliant, and deeply human figure whose story of struggle and recovery resonated far more profoundly than any winner's medal could. He was the genius who had been cast aside, the hero who had fallen, and the man who had found the strength to get back up, all with a twinkle in his eye. Ultimately, Jimmy Greaves leaves a twofold legacy. He is, by the immutable logic of the numbers, one of the greatest and most lethal goal scorers in the history of football. His records stand as a testament to a talent so pure it seemed elemental, but his more enduring legacy is that of a cultural icon. His journey serves as a timeless and poignant commentary on the complex, often cruel, relationship between individual brilliance and the demands of the collective. He was the uncrowned king, but in his humanity, he won a place in the public's heart that no single victory could ever secure. People think they know Chris Waddle, the showman, the maverick, with that unique, slouched running style, the uncoached entertainer who escaped a sausage factory to dazzle crowds across Europe. But this view is wrong, or at least incomplete. When Chris Waddle names his 4 favourite football players, it is not just a list of friends, it is a confession of his deepest values, a blueprint of the world in which he thrived. His choices reveal something unexpected. He picked a keeper, a fullback, a centre-back, and a midfielder. Together, they show he was not just an instinctive winger, he was a secret tactician. His magic was built on a foundation of composure, discipline, security, and genius. We are about to reveal the real Chris Waddle and the architects who made his brilliance possible. Waddle was never fast. He used a deceptive, languid grace instead. He skipped by helpless opponents, lulling them before deploying his majestic left foot. His career took him from Newcastle, where he helped secure promotion, to Tottenham, where he partnered with Glenn Hoddle. Then came Marseille, where he became Magic Chris, winning 3 titles and reaching a European Cup final. Finally, Sheffield Wednesday, where he was crowned FWA Footballer of the Year in 1993. Waddle loved being a showman, but he knew the show needed a stage. What do you think is more important in football, pure entertainment or tactical discipline? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoy deep dives that look past the obvious, make sure to subscribe for more stories like this. His journey to the top was anything but conventional. After rejections from multiple league clubs, Waddle was playing for Tolaw Town in the Northern League when Newcastle United took a £1,000 gamble on the 20-year-old in 1980. It was a move that rescued him from manual labour at a sausage factory. This grounding in the raw, chaotic world of non-league football shaped the player he would become. He honed his dribbling in sprawling 25-a-side matches on bumpy pitches. He learned to be instinctive, individualistic, and utterly unique. At Newcastle, he was the raw, emerging talent. After a slow start, he established himself as a key attacking force. He played alongside England captain Kevin Keegan and the gifted Peter Beardsley. This potent trio fired Newcastle to promotion to the First Division in the 1983-84 season. Waddle netted 18 league goals that campaign. In total, he scored 52 goals in 191 appearances for the Magpies, earning his first England cap and marking himself as one of the country's most exciting prospects, his style was described as unhurried and laid back. It could be misconstrued as laziness when things went wrong, but when they went right, it was pure artistry. He did not sprint past defenders. He dropped his shoulder and swung his majestic left foot to manipulate the ball wherever he wished. He operated on instinct, openly skeptical of rigid coaching. He proudly stated that he was never coached and bet that John Barnes, Peter Beardsley and Paul Gascoigne were never coached either. For Waddle, the game was about expression and entertainment above all else. The first architect Waddle admired was Ray Clemence, his goalkeeper at Tottenham. Waddle said of him, never committed himself in one-on-ones, always stayed big and made strikers beat him. Great awareness too. Clemence was a legend who relied on intelligence and anticipation. He made hard saves look routine, spreading unshakable composure throughout his defence. In the 1978-79 season with Liverpool, he conceded a mere 16 goals in 42 league matches. It was a record-breaking testament to his consistency and the organisation he commanded. But there was another reason Waddle picked him. It was his distribution. Waddle remembered how Clemence would catch the ball, and within seconds it would be at your feet, out on the wing. Clemence was the attacking catalyst. He was a prototype of the modern sweeper keeper, comfortable with the ball at his feet and possessing a superb range of distribution. He did not just stop goals, he initiated them, giving Waddle the ball early before the defence could reset. That rapid transition was crucial to how Waddle operated during their 105 games together at Tottenham. This feature was key to a side that finished third in the league and reached multiple cup finals. Understanding what Clemence brought to a team reveals much about Waddle's tactical mind. A winger's life is one of risk and reward. To beat a defender, to deliver a decisive cross, to cut inside and shoot. These actions require supreme confidence, not just in your own ability, but in the security of the team behind you. Waddle valued the players who provided the twin foundations of his game: a rapid start to the attack and the defensive solidity that permitted him to gamble in the final third. The second architect was Roland Nilsson, his teammate at Sheffield Wednesday. Waddle praised him for being very disciplined, rarely caught out of position, rarely made mistakes. A very good reader of the game who kept it simple. By the time Waddle reached Wednesday, he was in his 30s. He was older and relied more on guile than pace. His effectiveness depended on a partner who could provide the energy and defensive cover on the right flank. In Swedish international Roland Nilsson, he found the perfect foil. Their relationship was symbiotic. Nilsson's defensive solidity and overlapping runs created space. His relentless work rate and tactical discipline occupied defenders, while his reliability meant Waddle could conserve his energy for the moments that mattered in the attacking third. Waddle himself said that Nilsson's discipline allowed him to concentrate on terrorising opposition defences. This was no small praise for a player who was already a UEFA Cup and four-time Swedish League winner before arriving at Hillsborough. Nilsson's consistent, unassuming excellence made him a cult hero among Wednesday fans, a quiet legend in a team of stars. Nilsson was the enabler. He provided the structure so Waddle could provide the magic. This partnership led to Waddle's 1993 FWA Footballer of the Year award in the 1992-93 season. With Nilsson locking down the right side of defence, Waddle was unleashed. He produced arguably the finest football of his career on English soil, guiding Wednesday to the finals of both the FA Cup and the League Cup. The success of a winger is contingent on two critical factors: receiving the ball quickly in advantageous positions and having the licence to take creative risks without fear of exposing your own team. Clemence solved the first problem. Nilsson solved the second. The third architect was Carlos Moser, his centre-back at Marseille. Waddle described him perfectly, exactly as you would expect from a Brazilian. He was technically out of this world, but if you wanted a fight, he would fight you. He added that he had never seen anyone as good in the air and that Moser could have played in any position. A must. Moser was the central pillar of Bernard Tapie's Galactico project, a team of superstars assembled to conquer Europe. Standing at 6'2", the Brazilian international was a physically imposing presence. He played 111 games alongside Waddle, providing the steel that allowed the team's constellation of attacking stars to flourish. Players like Waddle, Jean-Pierre Papin, Abedi Pele and Enzo Francescoli could express themselves because Moser held the defensive line. Moser perfectly embodied the team's ethos of winning by any means necessary. He was a cultured defender, comfortable on the ball and capable of launching attacks from the back. This aligned with the Brazilian stereotype of technical elegance. However, he was also an intimidating and aggressive competitor. His disciplinary record at Marseille proves it. He picked up 24 yellow cards and 2 red cards in 89 league appearances. That is evidence of the fight Waddle mentioned. His aerial dominance, which Waddle described as the best he had ever seen, was another key weapon. It made Marseille formidable at both ends of the pitch from set pieces. In Moser, Marseille had a player who could outplay you or outfight you, a combination that propelled them to 3 straight league titles and the brink of European glory. Moser was the foundation. He represented the lesson Waddle learned in France. Sublime talent must be backed by an uncompromising competitive spirit. Moser was the steel that allowed Waddle and the other artists to flourish. This duality captures something essential about elite football. At the highest level, artistry alone is not enough. It must be fused with a warrior's will to win. Waddle's experience at Marseille was transformative. His primary role there was to make goals for Papin and entertain. He was liberated in an environment where his gifts were not seen as a luxury, but as an essential part of a winning formula. The fourth architect was Glenn Hoddle, his teammate at Tottenham. Waddle said, "What a talent!" He considered Hoddle the best naturally gifted player he ever played with. In Waddle's eyes, he was the best ever. Waddle used a striking comparison. He said Hoddle was like a quarterback in American football. You would make runs, and he would just drop the ball at your feet. He also said he had never seen such a technically gifted player with both feet. Hoddle is widely regarded as one of the most gifted English players in history. He was a midfielder, blessed with sublime balance and close control, unrivaled passing and vision, and extraordinary shooting ability. The key to his genius, as Waddle correctly identified, was his ambidexterity. His ability to execute perfectly weighted 40-yard passes or powerful shots with either foot made him incredibly difficult to defend against. It gave him a range of options unavailable to almost any other player. During their 112 games together at Tottenham, their chemistry was telepathic. Waddle, the dynamic runner who stretched the play, was the ideal target for Hoddle, the deep-lying playmaker. The quarterback analogy is perfectly apt. Hoddle would survey the field and launch precise, visionary passes. Waddle would be the receiver running the route. Their close relationship extended off the pitch, famously culminating in their 1987 duet Diamond Lights, which reached number 12 in the UK charts. Furthermore, both men shared the experience of being somewhat underappreciated by a succession of England managers. These managers often struggled to accommodate their continental style in a more rigid, physical setup. This shared frustration likely deepened Waddle's admiration for Hoddle's unique talent. French legend Michael Platini once remarked that if Hoddle and Waddle were French, he would have built his team around them. It was a sentiment that spoke to how their talents were better understood abroad than at home. Hoddle was the visionary that Waddle's intelligent runs required. He was pure, unadulterated, technical genius. If Moser represented the fusion of skill and strength, Hoddle was the personification of artistry itself. Together with Moser, these two players chart the evolution of Chris Waddle's own understanding of the game. Hoddle represents the ideal of technical football that Waddle had always cherished, the kind of player he aspired to play alongside from his earliest days. Moser represents the lesson learned at the zenith of his career in Marseille, that to win at the very highest level, sublime talent must be buttressed by physical dominance and competitive spirit. So what does this all mean? Waddle's 4 choices are not random. They are a definitive blueprint. First, Clements, the catalyst, providing quick distribution. Second, Nilsson, the enabler, offering defensive discipline. Third, Moser, the foundation, combining technical steel. Fourth, Hoddle, the visionary, delivering creative genius. This blueprint debunks the lazy caricature of the luxury player. It proves Waddle was a deep thinker who understood his own art needed a flawless and reliable stage crew. He was not anti-system, he was anti-rigidity. His frustration was not with tactics themselves, but with restrictive tactics that stifled creativity. The very players he chose for his perfect team were disciplined, intelligent, and masters of their craft. They show that he understood his art required a well-built gallery. When Waddle lamented that he was considered a luxury player in England until his move to France, he was highlighting a key difference in footballing cultures in the English game of the 1980s, which often prioritised physicality and work rate. A player of his unique gifts could be seen as an indulgence. At Marseille, his role was clearly defined within a superstar team: create, entertain, and supply the ammunition for striker Jean-Pierre Papin. This was not an absence of tactics, but rather an intelligent application of them, designed to maximise the impact of a specialist. His ideal team is one of perfect balance. Defensive diligence enables attacking expression. Physical power provides the platform for technical brilliance. He understood implicitly that for every showman on the stage, there must be a flawless and reliable stage crew working diligently behind the scenes. His selections reveal what he relied upon in moments of pressure, what he admired in the heat of competition, and how he truly understood the intricate geometry of the game. His ultimate legacy is his embodiment of a profound truth, that the most entertaining football is also the most intelligent. He knew that for magic to be possible, you first need architects. His career was a testament to talent, perseverance, and the joy of football. His journey from a Northern League hopeful to a European Cup finalist is one of the sport's great romantic narratives. He won league titles, was crowned Footballer of the Year, and left an indelible mark on every club he represented, from the terraces of St James's Park to the fervent cauldron of the Stade Velodrome. Yet, as revealed by the teammates he revered, his greatest contribution may be his demonstration of balance between structure and freedom. He championed the cause of the entertainer, the player who could make a stadium hold its collective breath. As he once said, all fans want to see their teams win, but they love it even more when they are entertained as well. Through his own dazzling play, and through his admiration for the architects who enabled it, Chris Waddle showed the world how to achieve both. In the end, Chris Waddle was not just Magic Chris, he was a connoisseur of the game. He appreciated the goalkeeper's quick throw, the fullback's disciplined positioning, the centre-back's aerial dominance, and the midfielder's perfect pass. He knew these were the elements that made his own magic possible. He was not a naive individualist, but a deeply intelligent footballer who understood precisely what was required to make his brilliance shine. Thanks for watching.
People say I'm ruthless. I'm not ruthless. I'm doing my job for Manchester United.
Were you afraid of him?
Yeah. Early on in my career, definitely fear.
When we do something bad or we lost some games, he kicked the chairs and he kicked the boots, he kicked everything, the waters, the drink.
When you think about the players Sir Alex Ferguson feared, names like Roy Keane, Jaap Stam and Ruud van Nistelrooy come to mind. These weren't just world-class talents. They were men who challenged the very foundation of Ferguson's control at Manchester United. From 1995 to 2006, Ferguson systematically removed 5 of his biggest stars. Not because they couldn't play, but because they threatened something he valued more than trophies: absolute authority. His philosophy was simple and chilling. Ferguson believed no player, regardless of ability, could ever be bigger than the manager. He openly admitted that maintaining discipline might have cost United several titles, but he'd make the same ruthless decisions again because control was his only way to survive. These weren't desperate acts. They were calculated purges designed to send a brutal message to every player in the dressing room. Even legends could be disposed of if they stepped out of line. Ferguson's entire management system was built on a foundation of fear and obedience. He didn't just want talented players who could win matches. He demanded soldiers who would follow orders without question. The moment any player began to develop an independent voice, the moment they started to question decisions or build their own power base within the squad, Ferguson saw them as a threat that needed to be eliminated. This wasn't about building a family or creating loyalty through respect. It was about establishing a dictatorship where Ferguson's word was law, and any dissent would be crushed immediately. The manager constantly monitored his players for signs of rebellion, watching to see if anyone was affecting the dressing room atmosphere or challenging his control. Every decision was calculated to maintain the hierarchy he'd constructed. The first victim was Paul Ince in 1995. Nicknamed the Governor, Ince had been vital to United's early Premier League dominance, winning 10 major trophies in 6 years. But Ferguson grew tired of what he saw as Ince's arrogance and big-time attitude. The manager famously called him a big-time Charlie and a bottler in a documentary, words that defined why Ince had to go. From Ince's perspective, the exit was devastating. He was preparing to sign a new 4-year contract when he was suddenly told he'd been sold to Inter Milan for £7 million. Ferguson didn't care about Ince's feelings or contributions. He cared about removing an expensive, ego-driven figure to make space for younger, cheaper, more loyal players. The so-called Class of '92, including David Beckham and Paul Scholes, stepped directly into the void Ince left behind. United immediately won the Premier League and FA Cup double the following season. What made the Ince situation particularly calculated was the financial and cultural efficiency of the move. Ferguson was clearing space for academy graduates who would be paid far less and who owed their entire careers to Ferguson's system. These young players would never question the manager because their success depended entirely on his approval. By replacing an established, well-paid midfielder with hungry teenagers, Ferguson created a new generation of players who were completely loyal to him. They had watched Ince get discarded despite his success, despite his contributions to the club's foundation. The lesson was crystal clear to every young player stepping into that dressing room. No matter how important you were to the team, if Ferguson decided you were a threat, you were gone. Your past achievements meant nothing if you challenged his authority. Before we continue, which of these players do you think got the harshest treatment from Ferguson? Was it the captain he betrayed, the son figure he physically injured, or the defender he sold at a petrol station? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let us know why you think Ferguson crossed the line. Now, let's talk about one of the most shocking exits. In 2001, Ferguson sold Jaap Stam, the defensive rock who'd been essential to United's famous 1999 treble win. The sale happened because Stam published an autobiography that revealed sensitive club information. Specifically, Stam claimed Ferguson had made an illegal approach to sign him from PSV Eindhoven. Ferguson viewed this as an unforgivable breach of trust. He didn't just arrange a quiet transfer, he personally drove to a petrol station to tell the stunned defender he'd been sold to Lazio immediately. This was Ferguson enforcing what he called principle over pragmatism. The decision had real consequences. The following season, United finished third and won nothing. Ferguson later admitted that selling Stam was one of his biggest mistakes, but he never regretted the punishment itself. He was willing to lose a league title to prove that no player could expose the club's inner workings. The Stam incident reveals just how obsessed Ferguson was with controlling the narrative around his club. It wasn't enough that players performed on the pitch. They also had to maintain absolute silence about anything that happened behind closed doors. Stam's book exposed potentially illegal behaviour by Ferguson, revealing that the manager may have broken transfer rules. For Ferguson, this wasn't just embarrassing, it was a direct challenge to his ability to operate in secrecy. The punishment had to be severe and immediate to ensure no other player would ever consider revealing internal matters. The fact that Ferguson drove to a petrol station to deliver the news personally shows how important this message was to him. It was a humiliating way to end a partnership with one of the club's greatest defenders. What makes the Stam sale even more ruthless is that Ferguson knew it would hurt the team. He admitted years later that it was a mistake, that selling Stam and replacing him with the ageing Laurent Blanc weakened United's defence significantly. The trophyless season that followed proved Ferguson's admission was correct. But even knowing the tactical cost, Ferguson never regretted the decision to punish Stam. This reveals the true priority in Ferguson's management philosophy. Winning was important, but maintaining control was essential. If Ferguson had to choose between keeping his best defender and sending a message about absolute loyalty, he would sacrifice the defender every time. The subsequent season of struggle was the price Ferguson was willing to pay to maintain his dictatorship. David Beckham's exit in 2003 exposed Ferguson's obsession with control even when it involved someone he claimed to love like a son. Ferguson grew uncomfortable with Beckham's celebrity lifestyle, believing the player's focus was shifting from football to fame and commercial deals. The breaking point came after a 2-0 FA Cup loss to Arsenal. Ferguson criticised Beckham for failing to track back, but Beckham dismissed the criticism and allegedly swore. In a moment of rage, Ferguson kicked a boot across the dressing room from 12 feet away. It struck Beckham above the eye, leaving a visible cut. That physical injury became the symbol of their broken relationship. For Ferguson, This wasn't about hairstyles or brand deals. It was about losing control over Beckham's professional focus. When a player becomes a global brand, the manager risks losing influence to agents and sponsors. Ferguson believed Beckham thought he was bigger than the manager himself, which meant Beckham had to be removed. Despite their history, Beckham was sold to Real Madrid for £24.5 million. The Beckham situation exposes the fundamental insecurity at the heart of Ferguson's management style. As Beckham's fame grew, Ferguson felt his control slipping away. Beckham was receiving advice from commercial agents, making decisions about his image and brand that had nothing to do with Ferguson's approval. The manager could no longer dictate every aspect of Beckham's life, and that loss of control was intolerable. Ferguson's philosophy demanded that working hard be recognised as the ultimate talent, but Beckham's celebrity suggested that charisma and image could be just as valuable. The physical violence of the boot incident symbolised Ferguson's desperate need to reassert dominance over a player who had grown beyond his control. What makes the Beckham exit particularly cold is the personal betrayal involved. Ferguson had watched Beckham grow from a teenager in the academy to a world-class player and global superstar. He claimed to view Beckham as a son figure, someone he had personally nurtured. But the moment Beckham's independence threatened Ferguson's authority, all of that history meant nothing. Ferguson didn't hesitate to discard Beckham, to publicly criticise him, and, ultimately, to force him out of the club. For Ferguson, even someone he supposedly loved like family had to be sacrificed to maintain the power structure. Roy Keane's departure in 2005 was the ultimate power struggle. Keane was Ferguson's captain, his enforcer, his most trusted leader on the pitch. That trust shattered after Keane recorded a brutal interview for MUTV following a 4-1 loss to Middlesbrough. In the unbroadcasted footage, Keane tore into his teammates with shocking ferocity. He questioned Rio Ferdinand's commitment, saying, "Just because you're paid £120,000 a week and play well for 20 minutes against Tottenham, you think you're a superstar." He also criticised Edwin van der Sar, John O'Shea, Darren Fletcher, Alan Smith and Kieran Richardson, demanding the club start getting rid of players. When Ferguson confronted him, Keane apologised for his language, but stood by his criticisms. Then things got worse. Players, led by Gary Neville, complained about assistant manager Carlos Queiroz's training methods, and Ferguson believed Keane was using his influence to turn the squad against the coaching staff. Months earlier, Keane had also challenged Ferguson over a legal dispute involving shareholders and a racehorse called Rock of Gibraltar. Ferguson decided Keane had assumed managerial responsibilities that threatened the hierarchy. Even though Keane cried in his car after his contract was terminated, Ferguson forced him out. The Keane situation reveals the ultimate limit of Ferguson's system. For years, Keane had been Ferguson's perfect lieutenant, enforcing discipline among the players with the same ruthlessness Ferguson demonstrated from the manager's office. Keane had been the extension of Ferguson's authority on the pitch, maintaining the culture of excellence Ferguson required, and to operate independently, making decisions about which players were good enough and which coaching methods were acceptable. He crossed the line from loyal enforcer to rival power centre. Ferguson couldn't allow that. The manager's entire system depended on him being the sole source of authority. There could be no shared leadership, no alternative voices of influence in that dressing room. The political dimension of the Keane conflict makes it even more damaging. Keane didn't just criticise teammates, he challenged Ferguson's personal decisions, warning him that his legal dispute over a racehorse was bad for the club. For Ferguson, this was completely unacceptable. What mattered was that Keane had decided he had the right to question Ferguson's judgment. This kind of political challenge, combined with Keane's influence over other players regarding the coaching staff, created a situation where Ferguson faced the most serious threat to his authority in years. The captain was using his knowledge and influence to build opposition to Ferguson's decisions. That made Keane more dangerous than any of the other players Ferguson had removed. Ruud van Nistelrooy's exit in 2006 completed Ferguson's ruthless renovation. Prolific Dutch striker was furious after being benched for the League Cup final. During the match, he vented his rage and swore directly at Ferguson, forcing assistant manager Carlos Queiroz to intervene. But the real problem was Van Nistelrooy's toxic behaviour toward younger players. Defender Rio Ferdinand confirmed that Van Nistelrooy had physically kicked Cristiano Ronaldo during a training argument. Ferguson saw the situation clearly. By 2006, Ronaldo and Wayne Rooney were the future. Allowing Van Nistelrooy's negativity to continue would have damaged their development. Ferguson prioritised his long-term investment in Ronaldo and Rooney over the immediate goals Van Nistelrooy provided. The Van Nistelrooy case demonstrates Ferguson's cold calculation about player value. Van Nistelrooy was one of the most lethal strikers in Europe, essential to United's success. But Ferguson made a ruthless business decision. Ronaldo and Rooney represented the future. They were younger, more talented, and still mouldable. Van Nistelrooy, as a veteran approaching the end of his peak years, was becoming a problem. Ferguson calculated that the short-term loss of Van Nistelrooy's goals was worth the long-term gain of allowing Ronaldo and Rooney to develop without interference. The pattern across all 5 purges is undeniable. Ferguson's conflicts were never about football performance, they were about power. He used these expulsions as organisational memory, a brutal reminder that even defensive heroes and legendary captains were disposable if they challenged his system. The message was simple: submit to Ferguson's authority or be destroyed. And shockingly, the strategy worked. After selling Ince in 1995, United won the double immediately. After the damaging exits of both Keane and Van Nistelrooy in 2005 and 2006, United rebounded to win the Premier League in 2007, then won 2 more Champions League titles. The club showed trophy resilience, proving that his ruthless prioritisation of control over individual talent was strategically effective. The success that followed each purge reveals an uncomfortable truth about elite management. Ferguson's ruthlessness worked. Players who remained understood exactly what was expected. They saw what happened to legends who challenged the system, and they learned to follow orders. This created an environment where Ferguson's authority was never questioned, where his tactical decisions were implemented without debate, and where the culture of discipline was maintained across multiple generations. The younger players who replaced the expelled stars were grateful for their opportunities and loyal to the manager who had given them their chance. They understood that Ferguson had created their paths by removing the obstacles that stood in their way. In the end, Ferguson's legacy is inseparable from his ruthlessness. He built a generational dynasty, not through kindness or loyalty, but through fear and absolute control. His willingness to embrace conflict, to purge even his greatest players, was the foundation of Manchester United's success. It's a lesson in ruthless leadership. Sometimes, maintaining power requires destroying the people who helped you build it. Ferguson accumulated 13 Premier League titles and 2 Champions League trophies through this calculated approach. The dynasty he created lasted nearly 3 decades, outlasting every single player who challenged him. If you found this analysis eye-opening, make sure to subscribe and check out our next video on football's most controversial managers. When a formidable centre-forward like Malcolm McDonald names the 4 toughest players he's ever faced, you listen. There was no one quite like Super Mac. He was the swaggering, supremely confident goalscorer who arrived at Newcastle United in a chauffeur-driven Rolls-Royce. He was a cultural phenomenon of the 1970s, a man whose confidence could easily be mistaken for arrogance. He even engaged in pre-match trash talk before the 1974 FA Cup final, which only served to motivate Liverpool to victory. But this video isn't about that swagger. It's about something far more interesting. Deep respect. With his career cut short by a knee injury at just 29, McDonald has had time to reflect. To understand why his list of toughest opponents matters, you need to understand who he was on the pitch. Malcolm McDonald was a force of nature. He was quick, powerfully built, and possessed a ferocious shot that terrorised the finest defences in England. His aerial prowess was equally fearsome, making him a complete attacking threat. He became the top scorer in the First Division with 2 different clubs, Newcastle in 1975 and Arsenal in 1977. That's a rare achievement that speaks volumes about his consistency and quality. His entire philosophy was simple. Football had one purpose: scoring goals, and everything else was secondary. The numbers tell their own story. At Newcastle United, MacDonald scored 95 goals in 187 league appearances between 1971 and 1976. At Arsenal, he added another 42 goals in 84 league games from 1976 to 1979. These weren't just any goals. They were goals that won matches, goals that defined seasons, goals that made him a legend on Tyneside and a hero in North London. He remains Newcastle's 5th highest goalscorer of all time, a testament to his enduring impact on the club. MacDonald's swagger was part of his game. But what do you think? Is that kind of confidence missing from today's football? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and if you love stories from this golden era, make sure to subscribe. So, who could possibly challenge a man so single-minded about scoring? His answers reveal a fascinating insight: a goalkeeper, a defender, a winger, and another striker. These 4 choices show what he truly respected. Each represents a different form of challenge, a unique test that pushed MacDonald to his limits and forced him to evolve as a player. First on his list is Pat Jennings. Before they were teammates, they were adversaries. MacDonald represented England's attack, whilst Jennings guarded Northern Ireland's goal. Their international encounters were tense affairs, with MacDonald constantly probing for an opening against the giant keeper. These matches were battles of wills, with the striker's determination meeting the goalkeeper's unshakable resolve. Jennings was a unique specimen. He was a big, well-built and physical goalkeeper whose presence alone could intimidate forwards. His game was defined by unflappable composure and an almost casual dominance of his area. He famously gathered high crosses with a single, massive hand, a technique that became his trademark. His positional sense was unrivaled, and he seemed to read the game several moves ahead, anticipating danger before it materialised. Everything changed in the summer of 1977. Arsenal manager Terry Neill signed MacDonald from Newcastle for a club record fee. The following year, Neill made another bold move by bringing Jennings across the North London divide from Tottenham Hotspur. This transfer shocked the football world, as Jennings had been a Spurs legend for over a decade. Together, they formed the spine of a revitalised Arsenal side, a team that would reach 3 consecutive FA Cup finals between 1978 and 1980. The team was brimming with Irish talent, creating a unique chemistry that would define Arsenal's era. For a striker whose entire identity was built on scoring goals, the daily training sessions at Highbury became the ultimate proving ground. Every shot, every header, every turn was a personal duel against one of the world's elite goalkeepers. These weren't friendly practice sessions. They were intense competitions where neither man wanted to concede an inch. A striker's confidence is forged in his ability to consistently beat goalkeepers. The club's premier goal scorer was pitted daily against its premier shot stopper. This wasn't mere practice. It was a relentless, high-level competition between 2 masters of their craft. MacDonald would try every trick in his repertoire, every angle, every type of finish. Jennings would respond with saves that seemed impossible, denying MacDonald time and again. The psychological impact of this daily battle cannot be overstated. To be consistently denied in this controlled environment by Jennings's unique combination of size, agility, and intelligence would have fostered a profound and deeply personal respect for his ability. This daily, uncompromising test of his own limits was, in its own way, the toughest challenge of all. Second is Bobby Moore. In the landscape of English football, Bobby Moore occupied a sacred space. He was footballing royalty, the 1966 World Cup winning captain who had lifted the trophy at Wembley. His game was a masterclass in anticipation and timing, a cerebral art form that stood in contrast to the era's more physical enforcers. Whilst others relied on strength and aggression, Moore used his mind as his greatest weapon. MacDonald's reverence for Moore was forged during their time together in the England squad. When MacDonald made his full international debut against Wales in May 1972, he lined up alongside the legendary captain. For the young striker, it was a moment of profound significance, sharing a pitch with a man he had idolised. A year later, MacDonald was on the pitch as Moore equalled the national record for appearances. It was a symbolic moment connecting one of England's established heroes with one of its brightest emerging stars. MacDonald later recalled a single unforgettable evening. Sitting with Bobby Moore and Franz Beckenbauer, chatting about football is one night he would never forget. This memory places Moore in the most rarefied of atmospheres alongside the giants of world football. The fact that MacDonald treasured this memory decades later speaks to the profound impression Moore made on him. It wasn't just about Moore's ability on the pitch. It was about his presence, his aura, his understanding of the game at its highest level. Interestingly, MacDonald named the Derby County partnership of Colin Todd and Roy McFarland as the best defenders he ever played against. This seems contradictory, but it's not. Todd and McFarland represented the ultimate physical test, a coordinated and bruising assault on a centre forward. They worked in perfect harmony, covering for each other, doubling up on attackers, making life miserable for opposing strikers. Moore was different. He was the individual intellectual challenge. Despite being a player whose own style was defined by explosive power and pace, MacDonald recognised that the most formidable barrier wasn't always physical. Moore didn't need to kick you or outmuscle you. He simply read your intentions before you'd fully formed them yourself. He would intercept passes that seemed safe, make tackles that appeared impossibly timed, and position himself so perfectly that shooting opportunities simply vanished. Moore was the puzzle that neutralised Supermac's power and pace by simply outthinking him. For a striker as intelligent as MacDonald, this must have been both frustrating and deeply impressive. Third is George Best. There can be no ambiguity in MacDonald's assessment of George Best. When asked to name the single best footballer he ever faced, his verdict was swift and definitive. I played against the likes of Eusebio and Franz Beckenbauer, but nobody could touch George Best. This is not mere praise. It is the ultimate coronation from one of the era's most confident and accomplished players. To place Best above Eusebio, the Portuguese legend, and Beckenbauer, arguably the greatest defender of all time, is a statement of extraordinary significance. Best's pace with the ball was extraordinary. MacDonald, himself known for blistering pace, admitted that even he had trouble keeping up with him. For a player like MacDonald, whose speed was one of his defining attributes, this admission is staggering. It reveals the almost supernatural quality of Best's ability. Best wasn't a direct opponent to be marked or a striker to be contained. He was an elemental force. A footballing ghost who could drift through games and then, in a flash of brilliance, decide them single-handedly. He could beat 3 defenders in a phone box, as the saying went, and make it look effortless. Adding warmth to this professional admiration was genuine friendship. George was a good friend, MacDonald stated, and he was a lovely, warm man who loved his football. This poignant reflection reveals the man respected and liked by his peers. It provides a powerful counter-narrative to the often tragic public story of Best's life, the struggles with alcoholism and personal demons that would eventually overshadow his genius. But to those who knew him, played with him, and competed against him, Best was more than his troubles. He was a man who genuinely loved the game and brought joy to everyone who watched him play. George Best represents the one player whose genius forced MacDonald, the ultimate pragmatist, to reconsider his entire footballing philosophy. MacDonald's worldview was rigid. The purpose of football was to score goals, and everything else was secondary. Yet, here he was, placing a winger known more for his sublime artistry and dribbling above every other player he had encountered. This creates a fascinating conflict. If only the end product matters, why is the greatest opponent a man who embodied the beauty of the journey? The only logical conclusion is that Best's talent was so overwhelming, so singular, that it became the exception to MacDonald's rule. He was the one player who could not be measured by the simple metric of goals scored. His genius existed on a different plane entirely. Best could do things with a football that seemed to defy the laws of physics. He could change direction at full speed without losing control. He could dribble through entire defences as if they weren't there. He made the impossible look routine, and the routine look spectacular. In Best, even the most single-minded and results-driven professional was humbled, forced to acknowledge that sometimes football transcends statistics and becomes pure art. Fourth is Kenny Dalglish. The selection of a fellow forward is perhaps the most intriguing of the four. This was a rivalry between two kings, Supermac of Tyneside and King Kenny of Merseyside. His inclusion suggests a different, more profound definition of what makes an opponent tough. This wasn't about physical duels or tactical battles. This was about legacy, about greatness, about the measure of a career. The stage for their rivalry was set long before Dalglish arrived in England. Following the 1974 FA Cup final, Liverpool forward Kevin Keegan cited McDonald's pre-match trash talk as a key motivator for his team. Liverpool comprehensively defeated Newcastle that day, and McDonald's words came back to haunt him. This established a history of high-stakes competition between McDonald and the club Dalglish would come to personify. Their rivalry reached its peak in the 1977-78 season. McDonald was leading the line for Arsenal, whilst Dalglish had arrived at Liverpool as Keegan's replacement. The pressure on Dalglish was immense. Keegan had been Liverpool's talisman, and replacing him seemed an impossible task. Yet Dalglish made it look easy. The League Cup semi-final on February 7, 1978, provided a perfect example of their competitive dynamic. McDonald fired Arsenal into an early lead with the kind of clinical finish that had made him famous. But Dalglish responded, scoring a crucial equaliser for Liverpool, who won the match. It was a clash of titans, trading decisive blows on a major stage. However, the true nature of their rivalry extended far beyond individual matches. During McDonald's peak years at Arsenal, Dalglish's Liverpool was the dominant force in English and European football, winning the European Cup in 1978 and the league title in 1979. They were simply unstoppable, a machine of relentless efficiency and brilliance. Whilst McDonald was winning individual scoring titles, proving his prowess as a goal scorer, Dalglish was collecting the major team honours that define a player's legacy. For a competitor as fiercely ambitious as McDonald, this must have been difficult to accept. He was doing everything right, scoring goals at an incredible rate, leading his team's attack with distinction, but Dalglish's team was winning everything that mattered. The toughest opponent was the one who set the standard of success he was desperately chasing. Dalglish wasn't just an opponent for 90 minutes. He was a rival in the newspaper headlines every week and in the history books every season. Every time McDonald opened a newspaper or turned on the television, there was Dalglish lifting another trophy, scoring another crucial goal, cementing his place among the all-time greats. The relentless pressure of a direct contemporary achieving greater team success represented the ultimate professional challenge, a constant battle for legacy that never truly ended. The contrast between their careers became even more pronounced as time went on. Whilst both men were prolific strikers with similar attributes, Dalglish's ability to elevate his teammates and integrate seamlessly into Liverpool's system set him apart. He wasn't just a goal scorer, he was a complete forward who could create, assist, and control the tempo of matches. This versatility made him indispensable to Liverpool's success in a way that McDonald, for all his brilliance, never quite achieved at Arsenal. Malcolm McDonald's choice of his 4 toughest opponents is far more than a simple list. It is a map of the challenges that define greatness at the highest level of sport. Each name represents a different dimension of excellence, a unique form of mastery that tested McDonald in ways that statistics alone could never capture. Pat Jennings was the test of daily perfection, the teammate whose brilliance demanded excellence every single day. Bobby Moore was the test of footballing intelligence, proving that the mind could be more powerful than the body. George Best was the test of confronting pure, unquantifiable genius, a reminder that football could be art. And Kenny Dalglish was the test of legacy, the benchmark for ultimate success. This specific quartet reveals more about Malcolm McDonald himself than any list of bruising centre-halves ever could. It proves that behind the brash, confident Supermac facade was a sharp and insightful student of the game, capable of recognising and respecting greatness in all its forms. In celebrating these 4 titans, McDonald not only defines his own career, but pays tribute to an age of legends. Which of these 4 players do you think was the toughest opponent? Let us know in the comments below, and thanks for watching.
Come to play on the swings because we were younger players, younger lads, and we didn't want to join in with the big boys. And they used to see us, and they never used to have a goalkeeper.
I never respected him. Those were the words that echoed through football when David Rocastle faced his fiercest Manchester United rivals. When Rocky died tragically at just 33 years old in March 2001, the entire football world stopped. Arsenal fans mourned, but remarkably, even Tottenham supporters stood in silence before a North London derby, honouring a true gentleman of the game. Yet beneath that respected exterior lived a warrior whose loyalty to his teammates drove him to extreme acts of aggression, costly confrontations, and disciplinary disasters that would define one of English football's most violent rivalries. Today, we examine 3 Manchester United players who brought out the absolute worst in David Rocastle: Norman Whiteside, Paul Ince, and Brian Robson. The story begins in January 1987. Sir Alex Ferguson later pinpointed this exact month as the true genesis of the fierce Arsenal versus Manchester United rivalry. Arsenal arrived at Old Trafford riding high on a 22-match unbeaten run. They were confident, perhaps too confident. What happened next would change everything. The atmosphere was already tense when Norman Whiteside made his move. Whiteside was known throughout English football for his intense, uncompromising style. He never held back in tackles. When the 19-year-old Rocastle received the ball, Whiteside launched into a challenge that would ignite years of hatred. Rocastle's response was immediate and furious. The young midfielder completely lost his composure. He lashed out in retaliation against Whiteside, earning himself a straight red card. The sending off sparked a major scuffle on the pitch. Players from both sides rushed in. The confrontation even spilled into the tunnel area, where Arsenal manager George Graham encountered Sir Alex Ferguson and his assistant Archie Knox right in his face. As he described it, Graham was incensed by the intimidation tactics. He made a declaration that would define Arsenal's identity for years to come. That will be the first and last time they intimidate us. We are not going to be bullied anymore. The disciplinary failure was costly. Arsenal lost the match 2-0. Their unbeaten run ended. 7 players received yellow cards that day alongside Rocastle's dismissal, but the red card represented something far more significant than a single match loss. It symbolised a turning point. Rocastle, the young star with tree-trunk thighs and undeniable physical presence, had publicly declared that Arsenal would no longer absorb physical provocation without responding. The problem was that this aggressive stance came with serious consequences. Whiteside's tackle had successfully provoked exactly the reaction that derailed Arsenal's discipline. The sending off gave Manchester United a numerical advantage and psychological edge. It exposed a vulnerability in Rocastle's temperament that opponents could exploit. Even years later, Whiteside acknowledged that Rocastle was one of the few players who came back at him, a backhanded compliment that confirmed the young midfielder's uncommon tenacity. But the cost of that tenacity was a red card, a defeat, and a shattered unbeaten run. Arsenal had gained a reputation for aggression, but at what price? George Graham's demand that his team adopt a mean, tough, the gentleman warrior paradox was born. Off the pitch, Rocky was noted for his modesty, decency, and sportsmanlike conduct. On the pitch, he was more than capable of putting his foot in when needed, often crossing the line between competitive and reckless. The resentment from that January 1987 flashpoint simmered for 3 long years. Then came October 20th, 1990, the Battle of Old Trafford. Arsenal won 1-0 thanks to a goal from Anders Limpar. But that scoreline became a footnote to chaos. The brawl started when Limpar was challenged by Dennis Irwin. Nigel Winterburn immediately lunged at Irwin in retaliation. Irwin kicked out. Brian McClair joined in, aiming a flurry of angry kicks at Winterburn's back. What happened next shocked English football. 21 of the 22 players on the pitch became involved in the mass confrontation. Only goalkeeper David Seaman stayed away from the violence. Referee Keith Hackett later recalled that the game had been going smoothly before it suddenly exploded. The brawl lasted approximately 20 seconds, but those 20 seconds would have massive consequences. David Rocastle did not merely push and shove. Witnesses reported that he tried to throttle Brian McClair. This was not typical sporting rivalry. This was a clear act of extreme physical aggression that crossed into serious assault territory. Rocastle later tried to justify his actions. He described Winterburn as our little blood brother in trouble. He claimed Manchester United players were kicking Nigel like a nightclub brawl. His response? You cannot have this. We went in there and we stuck up for each other. The protective loyalty was admirable in theory. In practice, it manifested as overt violence that crossed legal boundaries and threatened the sport's integrity. This was not just a sporting foul, it was an act that could have resulted in criminal charges had authorities pursued them. Yet, Rocastle saw no issue with his extreme response, believing team loyalty justified any level of physical retaliation. Both clubs were fined £50,000 for bringing the game into disrepute. But the FA went further. For the first time in English League football history, they deducted points for player misconduct. Arsenal lost 2 points. Manchester United lost 1 point. Arsenal received the heavier penalty because of their involvement in a previous brawl against Norwich City in 1989. The punishment was historic and severe. The Battle of Old Trafford became a cautionary tale about uncontrolled aggression. Rocastle's attempt to throttle McClare symbolised how far the rivalry had descended into violence. The irony? Arsenal won the league title that season despite the deduction. The willingness to absorb such costs, yet still emerge as champions, reframed the battle as a psychological victory. But the victory came at a steep price. The club's reputation suffered, and Rocastle's image as a gentleman was permanently complicated by his role in one of English football's most violent episodes. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. Paul Ince versus David Rocastle. Two midfield warriors, two different clubs, same aggressive mentality. Who do you think was the better player? Drop your answer in the comments below. Now, let's talk about Paul Ince himself. Ince was the quintessential midfield warrior for Manchester United during this era. Like Rocastle, he was a dynamic box-to-box presence, central to his club's success. The duels between these two were not isolated incidents, but sustained high-intensity competitions for midfield control. Two generals committed to imposing their will on the game. The evidence of their physical battles is clear. In one memorable encounter, Rocastle used his brawn to see off a hefty challenge from Paul Ince before scoring a brilliant goal. This confirmed that their rivalry was founded on raw physicality and a mutual refusal to concede territory. But Ince played a crucial antagonistic role in the 1990 eruption. While Rocastle rushed to defend Winterburn, Ince directed his own intense aggression elsewhere. Accounts from the brawl confirmed that Ince violently retaliated against goalscorer Anders Limpar by shoving him over an advertising hoarding. This action placed Ince at the heart of Manchester United's most aggressive actions during the melee. The midfield clash was characterised by extreme protective loyalty on both sides. Ince's attack on Limpar provided direct context for the explosive escalation. It prompted Rocastle to direct his protective fury at United's aggressors, including his attempt to throttle McClare. The relationship between Rocastle and Ince was defined by reciprocal aggression. Constant physical duels between these pivotal midfield generals dictated the overall negative tone of Arsenal versus Manchester United clashes. Their rivalry was not merely strategic but highly personal, a conflict waged over professional territory and dominance. The parallel between these two players is striking. Both were physically imposing. Both refused to back down. Both prioritised team loyalty over personal safety. But this mirror image mentality created a toxic dynamic. Each player's aggression justified and escalated the other's response. The result was confrontations that damaged both clubs' reputations and forced football authorities to implement unprecedented punishments. Now we must address Brian Robson, Manchester United's legendary captain. The expectation of hatred between Rocastle and Robson seems obvious given the rivalry's intensity. However, the facts require careful examination. During the Battle of Old Trafford in October 1990, Brian Robson was not on the pitch. He was sidelined, recovering from an Achilles tendon injury that he had aggravated while playing for England at the World Cup. Neil Webb captained the side instead. Therefore, any perceived animosity between Rocastle and Robson must be understood not through physical combat in that defining flashpoint, but through competitive ideology and skill-based rivalry. The true conflict between these two was waged through the ambition to surpass the opponent's greatest figurehead. Robson was the respected, long-standing captain and premier midfielder of the opposing dynasty. Rocastle's competitive drive focused on demonstrating his superiority over the standards set by Robson. This rivalry asserted itself through skill and technical brilliance rather than brutality. One goal perfectly encapsulates this dynamic. During the 1991-92 season at Old Trafford, Rocastle produced a moment of pure brilliance. He used his brawn to see off a hefty challenge from Paul Ince, then skillfully evaded Brian Robson with a nifty step over before chipping the goalkeeper. This single goal symbolised Rocastle's mastery over United's entire central midfield structure. He neutralised both Ince's brute force and Robson's defensive intelligence in one fluid motion. This act of technical dominance against the opposition's captain represented the highest level of competitive rivalry, not just stopping the opponent, but embarrassing him with superior footballing skill. The nuance in the Rocastle-Robson rivalry is significant. While Rocastle engaged in reactive, visceral anger against aggressors like Whiteside and Ince, his confrontation with Robson was rooted in professional ambition and the quest for legitimate midfield superiority. Furthermore, Robson's absence due to injury during the 1990 brawl implicitly elevated Rocastle's role. He was the more effective, present warrior captain on that day. Rocastle's assertive leadership and aggressive intervention provided necessary protective solidarity for the Arsenal unit. Meanwhile, Manchester United, lacking their primary leader, descended into chaotic escalation. This reinforced Rocastle's status as the definitive midfield general during that crucial flashpoint. But again, we must acknowledge the cost. The rivalry with Robson, though more skill-based, still occurred within the context of extreme aggression that defined the era. The justification for all this fury returns to that moment in October 1990. Rocastle saw United players kicking Nigel Winterburn in what he described as a nightclub brawl scenario. His protective instinct kicked in. You cannot have this. We went in there and we stuck up for each other. This intense loyalty justified, in his mind, the extreme violence of trying to throttle an opponent. The paradox of David Rocastle cannot be escaped. He was universally respected off the pitch, noted for his inherent decency and modesty. Yet George Graham's Arsenal required a robust, uncompromising mentality. Rocastle became the physical embodiment of the club's transition toward a mean, tough attitude necessary to win major trophies. The aggressive loyalty fulfilled the mandate of the era. His clashes with Whiteside, Ince and Robson became essential chapters in Arsenal's narrative of overcoming psychological barriers. But at what cost? A red card in 1987 that ended an unbeaten run, an attempt to throttle an opponent in 1990 that resulted in historic points deduction, a reputation forever complicated by extreme acts of violence, even if motivated by team loyalty. Arsenal won the title in 1991 despite the deduction. The battle became a psychological victory, a successful consolidation of their identity as uncompromising champions. The confrontations that defined this era, the red card and the 21-man brawl, were crucial in hardening Arsenal's identity. They established the fierce rivalry that would define English football for 2 decades. The unique and unprecedented FA punishment of points deduction affirmed that the intensity driven by figures like Rocastle and Ince had forced a systemic re-evaluation of professional conduct. But the legacy remains complicated. Rocastle's competitive fury led him into violent clashes. His disciplinary record was marred by extreme reactions. The gentleman warrior paid a price for his loyalty. Yet even Norman Whiteside, the man who sparked it all, acknowledged Rocastle's unique tenacity in confronting him. This competitive spirit, framed by high integrity off the pitch, ensured that Rocastle's legacy transcended the disciplinary breaches. When he passed away in 2001 from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma at just 33 years old, the football community responded with profound admiration. Arsenal fans mourned their hero, but remarkably, even Tottenham supporters, Arsenal's fiercest local rivals, stood in unified silence before a North London derby. This tribute confirmed the widespread recognition of David Rocastle as a true gentleman of the game. His contributions remain synonymous with an era where Arsenal transitioned from a disciplined defensive unit to a formidable, uncompromising league champion. The rivalries with Whiteside, Ince and Robson defined not just his career, but an entire generation of English football. The aggression was costly, the discipline was lacking, but the loyalty was absolute. David Rocastle never backed down, never stopped fighting for his teammates, and never forgot what it meant to wear the Arsenal shirt with pride. That is his legacy. Complicated, controversial, but ultimately respected. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of Arsenal's most complex legends, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which football rivalry you want me to cover next.